One of the most glaring gender stereotypes in our time: pink for girls, blue for boys. Clothes, toys, furniture and other products. Cinema and our entire culture is permeated with this pattern. We're so used to it that we just take it for granted. But why these colors? When did shade of pink become associated with the femininity? Why is blue considered boyish? What do ancient warriors, feminists, lesbian, the White House and one Russian empire have to do with it? What's up, guys? We're going to ask questions about the color stereotypes today. And believe me, the answer will surprise you. In general, most of gender stereotypes begin from very long ago and not even in people. Even in our primitive ancestors, humanoid primates, at the dawn of the origin of social life began to form the first stereotypes, behavior and relationship of different genders. As you can hopefully realize, there was no contraception in those times. There was no family planning either. Women had either just given the birth or about to give birth. There were a lot of children, and in fact, all their sexual mature life, women were busy with childbearing care and upbringing. Even 200 years ago, it was absolute standard to have a large family with 8 to 10 children. Before the advent of medicine, there was a very high children mortality. No one knew how many children will survive, and they gave birth with a reserve. At the time, there were no developed social services, and if by old age you didn't provide yourself with plenty of children to care of you, you just risked to be alone, decrepit, old man with no possibility to get food. And starting with the humanoid primates, for all these hundreds of thousands of years, the stereotype about a woman should stay at home, give birth to children, and take care of household chores has been stuck. And also in ancient time, the rule was that whoever is the strongest is right. No one thought about the problem of domestic violence back then. They didn't even think about the houses back then. And as you can see, due to physical characteristics, male are usually the stronger ones. So men had rights, and what this woman wanted was of little interest to anyone. Nowadays, this kind of literature is in demand, but in the past, no one asked women in general about anything. Even nowadays, in some unspoiled tribes, you can buy a wife in exchange for a cow. In general, times were dashing, and in some places they are still so, even nowadays. Anyway, sexism has the same distance and ancient roots, and for all these many thousands of years of history, most of those gender stereotypes and inequalities were formed and have reached us, with which the society of 20th century actively fought, and the society of 21st century actively continues to fight. But where did the stereotype about pink color come from? Clearly not for people of Stone Age. We need to go back to not so distant past. It's the Middle Ages. Up until the 20th century, there were not such color stereotypes, but there were plenty of stereotypes at the time. Moreover, in the past, children were even equally dressed in dresses, regardless of gender. Yes, your great-great-great-grandfather probably ran around the yard in a girl's dress, and then it didn't cause such a resonance as it does nowadays. But you shouldn't think that back then there were freedom and equality. Everyone ran around in a skirt and loved each other. The Middle Age was a very harsh time, and it had nothing in common with the hippies of the 60s. It's simply that jeans are pretty late invention, as well as pants in general. It was much easier to wrap yourself in the clothes like the same Greeks did. I'll remind you, the sewing machine and the Industrial Revolution were still a long way off, so the first clothes were quite simple. And in the olden days, men used to wear skirts or dresses for a very long time. That was the norm. And even with the emergence of the ability to sew complex outfits, traditional clothes were not in a hurry to write off and continued to be actively used. In general, the history of clothing is a big topic deserving of separate video. If you want a story about it, write in the comments. But let's go back to the topic. We are talking about the color stereotypes, if you remember. So, since we the girls have associated with the pink color and with boy blue, what color used to be boys like to wear clothes? Wrong. Pink. Write in the comments if you guessed. Let's see how many of us are so smart. In the past, the pink outfit was considered as masculine and brutal. And yes, in the mind of our ancestors, brutality would have looked something like this or this. That's because pink was seen as shade of red, and red in turn was identified with the color of blood, war and all that. Remember that soldier looked like before camouflage was invented? Yes, they were colorful outfits, usually red. The British Guards, Revolutionary War uniforms, Roman legionaries. Yes, even Mars itself was named after the god of war because of its red color. Now you should definitely be surprised. Perhaps you've been prepared for this. Back in the day, the color blue was more favored by women, while red-pink was considered as the symbol of blood, impulsiveness and brutality, but the blue symbolized purity and innocence. The image of the Virgin Mary on frescoes and mosaics can most often be found in blue outfits. So, by the standard of the past, a gender-appropriate couple would look more like this. It should be noted here that of course not everything was so clear-cut. There were always those who went against stereotypes. There were famous women who wore pink and men who wore blue outfits. However, despite the stereotypes, some men still use pink in their looks. And despite this, time passed. Epochs, fashion and style changed, but a common stereotype remained. And even in 1918, in the Ladies' Home Journal was published an article that said the generally accepted rule is pink for boys and blue for girls. And that's very recent by the standards of history, literally yesterday. So where did the stereotype about the girls in pink come from? One of the first mention of such a gender distribution of colors is found, where do you think? In Russia. Except it was before Lenin and communism. In the early 18th century, Tsar Paul I introduced two awards that were worn on ribbons. For men, it was the Order of St. Andrew I called, and it was with a blue ribbon. And for women, the Order of St. Catherine with a pink ribbon. But it was in the distant Russia in the distant 1700s. And although then Russia was capitalistic and was good friends with the US, most likely not this served to form a mass stereotype. Closer to our time, references to the pink color I was able to find in the 13 years of the last century. Parisian fashion designer Elsa Schiaparelli first took pink color into use, calling it shocking pink. But there was no gender connotation here. And it's worth explaining that in those days women wore pastel and not flashy clothes. In general, everyone at the time wore pale and unmarkable clothes. Elsa was an outrageous woman. She even had a close relationship with Salvador Dali himself. And he was a bit of an entertainer, and I think he had an influence on her as well. If you want a video about Salvador Dali, write in the comments and subscribe. I have materials about him, and that will surprise you. And so, to stand out from the other fashion designers, Schiaparelli decided to take a course on an eye-catch color and choose pink. It's hard to say why. If she would have picked green, for example, the world might be a different place now. Elsa Schiaparelli made a significant cultural revolution in fashion, and since she sought for women, pink dress began to appear on many ladies. For example, the American actress and sex symbol of the 50s, Zsa Zsa Gabor. And in 1952, she acted in the legendary movie Moulin Rouge, in a pink dress by Schiaparelli. In the same years, this fashion is picked up by the First Lady, Mamie Eisenhower. She appeared at her husband's inauguration in a lush pink dress. It made American women go crazy, and it became one of the most talked about outfits in history. Mamie didn't stop there. She started wearing pink dresses and suits everywhere, and she decorated the White House with the pink furnishings. It even became known sometimes as the Pink House. And the soft pink color that the First Lady loved so much was called Mamie Pink. But this was only the beginning. Really mass fashion for pink color brought the color television, and as usually happens, Hollywood. The incomparable Marilyn Monroe in the movie Gentlemen Prefer Blondes appeared in a pink dress and for a long time became the ideal for female beauty and sexuality. And the musical number in the movie Funny Face finally consolidated the trend for the pink color.
I wouldn't presume to tell a woman what a woman ought to think, but tell her if she's gotta think pink, 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 pink on the long, long road ahead.
And exactly in 50s, pink is gaining maximum momentum. It moves from fashionable outfits of socialized to everyday life in homes of ordinary Americans. But by that time, there is no clear stereotype that pink is for girls. For example, the Cadillac releases its legendary model Cadillac Fleetwood in pink, which, by the way, was driven by Elvis Presley himself. This car is now on exhibit at the Elvis Presley Museum in Memphis, Tennessee. Yeah, and pink outfits, the king of rock and roll also didn't avoid as many men of the time. It wasn't something shameful or for girls. It was just a fashionable and trendy color of the time. And yet, in society, there is still no clear connection of pink and blue color to a certain gender. Pink is just a fashionable color. It is worn by both women and men without any prejudice. The main gender stereotype for pink and blue color was formed by those who fought against these very gender stereotypes, as ironic as it may sound. In the 60s, the second wave of the women's rights movement took hold. And whether due to fashion or due to the activity of socialist moods, but feminism began to use red and then pink symbols for their protests. In addition to feminists, movements for the rights of the LGBT community were gaining momentum. This is how the lesbian flag looked like. And as you might have guessed, the flag of the gay community used blue colors. People who fought against sex and gender stereotypes without realizing it themselves created and perpetuated one of the most massive gender stereotypes of our time. This is so often the case in history. Great scientists wanted to give humanity an endless and inexhaustible source of cheap energy. It was supposed to be the most revolutionary discovery in history and bring happiness to all mankind. But in the end, it turned into the most terrible tool ever created and brought a lot of death and suffering. For the sake of truth, I will say that later the symbolism tried to change. Flags were diluted with the additional colors, and now they look like this. But it was too late. The stereotype was launched. It spread and became deeply rooted in our society. By the way, the transgender flag still has pink and blue as a symbol of men and women. Well, friends, I hope this has been fascinating and informative. And that's all for now. Get wise up and see you in the next video.